Working is presented by Maya Strategy Group, a leading market research and strategy consulting firm, helping clients in the pet care and animal health industries navigate strategic challenges for almost 2 decades.
Everyone, and welcome to Pet Working. I'm Peter Kenseth, Vice President and Partner at Maya Strategy Group, and here today with a very exciting episode for you on a topic I think near and dear to all of our hearts, and that's animal adoptions and rescues. We are very privileged to have Dr. Karen Shenoy, Chief Veterinary Officer from Hills, with us today, along with Stephanie Filer, Executive Director of Shelter Animals Count. And we are going to discuss a recent report, the 2024 State of Shelter Pet Adoption Report that Hills just put out. There's some very interesting findings relative to the state of overall animal ownership and animal adoption. But I think the important thing to realize is we're at a critical point right now where the majority of the shelters in this country are at or above capacity, and there's a capacity crisis here. And so, among many reasons that that Hills and Shelter Animals Count came together to work on this report was to kind of figure out, what are the barriers to adoption? What are the barriers to pet ownership in this country? And there's a lot of different factors that touch on a lot of things that we've covered on Pet Working over the last year and a half. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shenoy to kind of give a brief introduction to the report, kind of fill us in on some of the key findings and really the motivation behind the report. In addition to serving as the Chief Veterinary Officer for Hills, Dr. Shenoy is on the AVMA's Food Safety Advisory Committee. She's on the Diversified Veterinary Medicine Coalition. She's a member of the board of Chief Veterinary Medical Officers. So really lucky to have her on the program. So without further ado, Dr. Shenoy, please give us a little bit of background, and then Stephanie will turn it over to you as well.
Thank you so much. It is just an honor to be here today. I have been at Hills Pet Nutrition for 16 years and have certainly seen in that time, plus the 20 years in general that I've been in the veterinary industry, a lot of changes. And, it's very important to us at Hills to focus on the shelter community and animal welfare, and have a longstanding, history of support against those organizations, especially through our Hills Food, Shelter, and Love program, which has been in existence for 22 years. So shelters are core to how we live our mission to help enrich and lengthen the special relationships between people and their pets. And in addition to kind of the work that we've done over the years to helping to support the shelter community, we're really understanding that there's a need for additional data. And so I know Stephanie is going to talk a lot about the data that we have around what's happening in shelters themselves. This report that we've just released, our second annual report, is really understanding that there's more that needs to be done to dig into understanding what's happening in communities. So we know that there are a lot of animals in shelters. We know that adoptions are decreasing, and we need to understand more what those barriers are to adoption, why we're seeing some of those trends. So we aim to really survey a wide range of individuals and start to pull out some of that data and be able to share that. We wanted to share it with the shelter community so that various shelters can look at the data, think about specific strategies that they can implement that help decrease some of those barriers and really can make a meaningful difference in turning around some of these adoption rates. So maybe I'll leave it there for now, but super important report that we're really grateful to be able to bring to the community.
I mean, there's a wealth of insights. I got an advanced copy of the report late last week, and I've been poring over it as I've had time in the last few days. And I'll be freely honest, I have not had the opportunity to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but even just reading through it, at a high level a few times, I think there's a lot of really important findings there. And Stephanie, I think this is a great place, to bring you in. And as Dr. Shenoy said, I think you can talk a little bit about the high level trends and what you've seen. I know you bring 20 years of involvement in nonprofits to the table. You were at the Animal Rescue League of Iowa for 12 years prior to coming to Shelter Animals Count as executive director back in 2021. And it's kind of an interesting inflection point when you join Shelter Animals Count, because you come off the year probably where we saw more pet adoptions than any year in history with the pandemic. And now, over the last 3 years, I think, we've seen adoption rates continually decline. Talk to us, what was most striking to you, in as you got the results of this report, and if you could as well, maybe give us a little bit of the methodology, who was surveyed, how many people, so that we can place these findings in context a little bit more.
Sure. So Shelter Animals Count, we were founded as an independent nonprofit organization by all of the national animal welfare groups who realized that we need to have a broad data set of what's happening in and out of shelters. So the good news is we've been collecting data since 2016. The bad news is we don't have a lot of data prior to that. But when we have started to look at the trends in the last 4 years, we've really seen what we thought was maybe a hopeful new normal in 2020, where communities were rallying around their shelters, shelters were emptying pets literally overnight into adoptions and foster homes. And what we saw in 2021 was a very different story. And so I actually got involved originally with SAC because we were at my own shelter. We were trying to understand, is this headline of pets being surrendered in record numbers following the pandemic actually true? And we found not only was it not true for our organization, it wasn't true as a national trend across the country. And so as Shelter Animals Count has dug more into that, we've been able to really identify what's happening. Adoptions are down, intakes are starting to go up, but not still at 2019 levels, even yet this year in 2024. We still are not at the levels of intakes we were in 19, but unfortunately the outcomes have not kept pace at the same time. And so when we started to dig into that, we were seeing shelters were actually becoming full, not because of more pets entering, but actually more pets staying behind. And so that imbalance of more coming in than are leaving every day, now compounded in 2021, 22, 23, and now halfway through 2024, it's created this real crisis across the country where shelters are full. And when we started to dig into why outcomes were down, it started to look more and more clear that it was not only a dog problem, but a large dog problem. And that was about as far as we could take it with the data that we went, which is why, that we track, which is why we were thrilled when Hills wanted to take on this report, using our data as a starting point to launch further into why are adoptions down, why are pets. We also knew when we looked at the data that pets were being surrendered still at about the same rates as they were previously, if not even a little less. But of the reasons why pets were surrendered, the economy and housing-based reasons were still the top across the country. And so this report really looks at both sides of that equation and gets a little deeper into the why, but there's still a lot to be done on what next with this information. So from a methodology standpoint, I'll kick it over to Dr. Shenoy if she wants to add anything additional to that.
Yeah, so specifically in the State of Shelter Pet Adoption report, we surveyed 2,500 individuals, Americans from socioeconomically diverse backgrounds. And as Stephanie said, really we're striving to understand specifically what some of the barriers are to pet adoption to kind of better answer these questions around why we're seeing some of the rates decline. And as she alluded to, we're seeing that especially for dogs, that the length of stay is increasing. I think cats are actually kind of having a moment, and we're seeing adoption rates for cats tick up a little bit. For dogs, it absolutely is the large dogs where we're seeing especially some significant challenges. So they're staying in shelters longer, and over the past 5 years, actually, the length of stay has increased 100% for large dogs. Something that's actually a bit of good news that we wouldn't have maybe understood fully previously is that younger generations are actually more open to adopting larger dogs. And so that gives shelters some meaningful data to be able to know kind of which demographic they might be looking at to help kind of open up the possibility of getting those larger dogs adopted out. I myself happen to have 3 shelter dogs, and I would classify 2 of them as large dogs. So I've got a special spot in my heart for those large dogs. Let's see, the medium dogs, there's been an 80% increase in length of stay, and for small dogs, a 50% increase. So you can see that it's significant for them as well, but a little less than the large dogs.
Yeah, and I think that tracks with what we're seeing, on a national level related to pet ownership. I mean, I think for the first time this past year, we saw the French Bulldog become the most commonly owned breed in the U.S., displacing the Lab for, I think, the first time in 20 years. Obviously, Labs are large dogs, um, and we've definitely, I think we're seeing cat ownership continuing to grow, and we are seeing dog ownership growing, but at very suppressed rates. I mean, we're talking, maybe a 0.5% growth year over year for the last, several years. And so, that echoes what we're seeing, and what, when I was reading the report, I was like, this jives with the pet ownership statistics that I've seen. I think, I mean, and there's a lot of factors, and I think they are related. We talk about cost of pet ownership being the top concern. Um, it's cheaper to feed a small dog than it is to feed a large dog. It just sheer volume of food, when the more you have to feed, the more expensive it gets. And so there typically, there are, and I know the report alludes to this, it's maybe not the primary concern, but if you're in a situation where you're renting, oftentimes there are breed restrictions or there are size or weight restrictions on the dogs. Those typically don't apply to cats. They don't apply to small dogs. There's the convenience of being able to travel with your pet. If you have a large dog, you can't bring it on a plane unless you want to put it in the cargo hold, or unless you want to fly Bark Air and pay $6,000 to fly across the country with your pet. And if you're not bringing it with you, then you either have to pay somebody to watch it or pay to board it. And all of those things, it is not inexpensive to own a large dog. It definitely is a concern. And I have a shelter dog. We've had for 7.5 years now. She's 70 pounds, so definitely a large dog. She's a lab mix. But there is a food bill. There's anytime you want to go on vacation that you can't put her in the car, that's another boarding stay or pay to have a sitter. So I definitely think that makes sense. And I think again, a lot of those things don't apply to cats. It's, you can pay to have somebody come over and fill your cat's water and food, and they're going to be fine, and for the time that you're gone, and you don't need somebody there to stay with them. So I think there's lots that's related there. But I think, and Dr. Shenoy, maybe you'd be very well positioned to kind of elaborate on this. The other half of it is veterinary bills and veterinary care. We've seen the cost of veterinary care, significantly outpacing the rate of inflation. You know, we did an episode with Odie Pet the other day in the wake of the nationwide pet insurance cancellations, where they cited the rise in cost of veterinary care as to why they were canceling 100,000 policies. I know when we adopted Peony, it cost $65 to take her to the vet back in 2017, and now it's over $100 just for a visit. So we're looking at almost 100% increase in just the cost of a vet visit in less than 10 years. So pretty significant increases in cost. I'd be curious, do you want to talk a little bit about what are the big drivers in the increasing costs of veterinary care, and to what extent are we seeing, I know that in the report it says most people are aware that veterinary care is the most expensive part of owning a pet. What are we doing to kind of help resolve that issue?
I think as we think about this kind of intersection between veterinary care and the shelter numbers that we're talking about today, there's a couple key things that we could hone in on. There's challenges around access to care, and cost of care are definitely both, very topical issues. And the report does say that nearly half, so 43% of respondents felt that the overall cost of pet ownership was one of their top concerns as we really look at what are these barriers to adopting a pet. And so from the shortage standpoint, or the access standpoint, there is a shortage of veterinary professionals. And I certainly see that that is true in the shelter setting, where we need more veterinary professionals to help care for the animals that are in the four walls of the shelter. And then there's absolutely across the country some areas that we would call veterinary deserts, where there's not access readily to veterinary care. Tangled up in that, of course, is also cost to care as a barrier. And one reason that we're really proud to lean in and do even more with shelters today is that many of them are evolving their services. So while we're talking about sheltering and taking care of the animals that are in their four walls, many shelters are also recognizing the need to reach out into communities and provide a variety of different services that help support individuals in need in the communities. And so part of the work supporting shelters actually directly does go into this space of addressing access and cost of care type issues, meaning that there are shelters that are providing veterinary services that are at a reduced price or sometimes free, and usually they're pretty targeted services reaching out to individuals that have a need that might not otherwise be able to access veterinary care. So, complex issue, but definitely some great work that's being done. I'll also point to one other very specific thing that Hills has gotten even more involved with recently, or a specific organization, and that's the Street Dog Coalition. So that's a group that reaches out into communities. They do these different community clinics throughout the nation, and they focus on helping individuals that are either unhoused or at risk of becoming unhoused. So a wide range of individuals in need that are being supported. And we're proud to have expanded our partnership with them to both help the individuals, the people that are at those clinics seeking services, and specifically the pets as well. So different hygiene and various products that we're able to provide, as well as pet food then for the pets in need.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. And it's heartwarming to hear that, because you see, I think one of the most timeless things, you see homeless people on the streets with their dog, and that bond is every bit as resonant and salient. That dog is happy because they're with their person. And just because they're economically disadvantaged, because they're unhoused, they're homeless, doesn't diminish the care that and the lengths to which people will go to provide care for their pet. I think it's one of the most perfect examples of the human animal bond. But it raises a really good point of as we see these escalating costs of veterinary care, these escalating costs of pet ownership, do we run the risk of making pet ownership something that is exclusive to the upper classes of society? And I don't think that's what any of us want. I think everybody deserves, and pets deserve to live, in the broadest variety of homes. Kids deserve to grow up with a dog or a cat, and have that experience, and have that bond. But the report calls out that owning a pet is less accessible for people who earn less than $75,000 a year. And when we look at $75,000 a year compared to somebody who's homeless on the street with their dog or cat, that's certainly a stark difference in economic status. But if we're restricting, if we're saying pet ownership is difficult unless you earn $75,000 a year, that's drawing a pretty hard line in the sand with respect to qualifications for pet ownership. So I think that it's great to hear that Hills is stepping up to the plate with the Street Dogs program. But I'd be curious, Stephanie, in your experience, to what extent, obviously we have applications that people have to fill out at shelters to make sure that the pets are going to a good home, and that they're going to be adequately cared for. Are there considerations taken in, to maybe help people who show an interest in adopting an animal that might not have the economic means necessary to take care of them? And are there programs to help those people achieve a goal of pet ownership and provide that pet with a loving home and situation, despite of the economic challenges that might exist?
Sure. So it actually, a lot of the cost of a pet can include acquisition costs. And so one of the things that I think adopting from an animal shelter or a rescue organization is oftentimes one of the things we learned before COVID through a lot of research was the price a person pays to acquire their pet has nothing to do with the bond. They're completely separate. So that's when you saw animal sheltering organizations start to do fee waived or reduced fee adoptions. And are still continuing to this day. And right now, with shelters being full, there's a lot of weekends and every day, often I see an organization doing a fee waived adoption event. The nice thing about that as well, when it comes to the cost of veterinary care for people who may struggle for that initial upfront cost of vaccines, spay neuter surgery, microchip, et cetera, often these pets that are adopted from shelters already have that. And so they can get a pet for sometimes as little as no cost that already has $1,000+ dollars invested in medical fees. And that's even oftentimes, we have animals coming in a variety of medical conditions that are treated within the shelter as well. And so they can really get a pet at an affordable fee for their family upfront. That the intent is that then they use the money that they save in the acquisition to get set up with supplies and everything they need going forward. But we do see when we look at the data, once pets are in a home, there definitely is a variety of differences on what they're needing to help support them and keep them in their homes. And veterinary care is more than half of the services that shelters provide to pets that are in a home. Food being close second at more than a third. But they're also, when we look at the economic barriers of acquiring a pet, we know that there's some things that sheltering organizations can do to improve that as well. Besides just the cost, we can also look at the other barriers to adoption and start to adjust our processes and programs as a result.
Have you seen, obviously providing free veterinary services is fantastic, or reduced cost veterinary services. But Dr. Shenoy, you alluded to, the veterinary shortage. I think, I've seen statistics that, within the next 10 years, we're going to be running at a deficit of, somewhere on the order of 30,000, veterinarians, that would be needed to adequately provide care for the number of animals in the US. And because of that situation, we obviously see increasing levels of veterinary burnout. We see compassion fatigue. We see, more private equity and VC money flowing into the veterinary space because it is a very lucrative investment, opportunity. But, they're not getting into the business of providing free veterinary care. Maybe some of the more benevolent or philanthropic, but, obviously people are also out to make a living. One of the things, that I've been interested in is, in spite of this, we see, we live in a country where there's about 4% adoption of pet insurance. And I've been really surprised that, I think a lot of nutrition brands, Hills, Mars with Pedigree, Purina, they have, both for philanthropic reasons and because it's a great opportunity to introduce your product to people, have, focused on shelters. And I'm really surprised that more pet insurance companies have not taken this opportunity, because when you adopt a pet from a shelter, that there's not really much of a medical record. So that's like the ideal time to insure a pet. Have either of you seen, I know we had Rescue Spot on back at the end of 2023, and they have a partnership with Odie Pet Insurance, where when you fill out the application on Rescue Spot, you can add pet insurance to the cart. Have either of you seen pet insurance companies kind of reaching out and partnering with shelters to, help defray the cost of veterinary care for pet parents down the road?
Yeah, I can talk to that. Actually, it is a huge strategy of pet insurance companies is to get adopters as a client at point of adoption. And so actually, as being a former shelter worker myself, we're constantly inundated with a variety of companies trying to get into the shelter. And there's a variety of challenges with that when it comes to the adoption process. And a lot of it is, a person is coming in, they're excited, they got all these things to sign, they need to get their supplies, et cetera. And so usually what we're seeing from some of the industry partners that we've talked to is that the conversion actually happens several days later after the pet's home and settled. And so there is that opportunity for the insurance up front. And there's a whole host of different ways that these programs are structured. And some of them still are not affordable, especially if you have multiple pets. And so It's not a one-size-fits-all solution by any means. None of the things that we are digging into and identifying are. It really is this this comprehensive approach from a lot of different angles. But I think, to your point, it does open the need for more public organizations, more for-profit organizations to rally around their shelter systems within their communities and within the country and see what other ways that they can do to support. Whether it's veterinary, whether it is, training for their adoption staff, there's a whole host of things that can be done. But I think the pet insurance is a good solution. So is care credit. So are some of these other things. And often there still are barriers to certain households because of how those programs are structured. So it is not as simple as everybody should get insurance. Everybody has access to care credit. There's a lot of things that go into that.
Oh yeah, no, I mean you're absolutely right. If you don't have enough fund, for the way most pet insurance is structured, you're still bearing the upfront costs, right? So if you don't have the cash or the requisite credit to be able to pay for those services, you know, doesn't really work. If you don't have a good credit score, you're not going to get approved for care credit. So that option is, I have seen, and hopefully we'll have them on at some point, but there is another alternative out there called All Pet Card, which really focuses on trying to provide, very similar to care credit, but I think they have a lower credit score approval threshold. So they have, I think, like a 70% approval, and then they allow flexibility in repayment over the course of the loan, so that you could have somebody who gets a 12-month financing option. They don't have to make 12 equal monthly payments. It's just, did you pay off the balance by the end of 12 months? So I think it's great to see people innovating around that, but you're absolutely right. With the disparity in socioeconomic status and cash flow flexibility, it's a big issue. I think, statistics out there say that, I think it's 70% of Americans can't afford even a $400 unanticipated expense. And we know what like I said, just walking into the vet and being seen, is around $100 these days. And that's excluding any diagnostic testing, blood work, x-rays, medications, anything like that. So it definitely is a big thing. I think we could go on about the rising cost of veterinary care probably for the rest of the episode, but there are other significant barriers to pet adoption that were raised in the report. And I'd be curious, Dr. Shenoy, what did you see as outside the economic factors? What did you see as the most salient barriers to adoption?
Something I wanted to jump in with that relates to the topic at hand on the cost, but then also does kind of segue into another important barrier, is just the importance of having an established relationship with a veterinary practice. So I just want to really emphasize that if it's feasible to do so, even before you go into the shelter to start the process of looking for a pet, it's really helpful to build that connection. We talked about access. It's going to be easier to get into a practice if you have an established relationship, and once you've adopted the pet, if they've seen your pet before, that way you've got that relationship. And if an issue does come up with your pet, you're able to get in and be seen probably a little bit earlier and easier. And then the other point on cost is that the veterinary clinic can help you plan for those expenses so that they're not completely unanticipated, but that you have an idea of what you need to be ready for from a savings standpoint, so you can budget accordingly, so you can have some of those tools. They often are able to help direct you to resources as well. And that again segues then into something else that we can talk about, that is the post-adoption support. I think that we really uncovered a lot of interesting information related to how challenging it can be to welcome a new pet into your home. And the fact, I think we need to kind of normalize the fact that there can be ups and downs, that you can have some challenges. It's, exciting and wonderful that you've got this new member in your family on day one, but then it's not uncommon that there's some ups and downs as you introduce the pet into the household, meeting your other pets, meeting other family members, various things. And we found that, there were actually probably more pet owners than I'd like to realize that at some point post-adoption considered relinquishing a pet back to the shelter. yet when we talked kind of specifically about or dug into that a little bit for some more detail, we found that 94% of those pet owners that were considering relinquishment actually kept their pet after they received support. So whether that's support from some of the services that the shelter provides around behavioral counseling or just general advice, or support from veterinary professionals, which I think many times is the source of that support, once they kind of are helped through some of those initial hurdles, were much more likely, almost always likely to keep the pet that they had adopted. So that was another just very kind of positive stat coming out of the report that I would certainly highlight.
Yeah, I think, what did it say? Like 46% of the of pet parents who experienced some sort of anxiety post-adoption said it was due to a behavioral concern. And I think, that also speaks to, I thought it was great that the report called out, that there are a lot of common misconceptions around shelter animals that, I think they're largely being dispelled, but there are, I think there are these myths that, through urban legend or whatever continue to persist, that shelter animals are behaviorally challenged, or shelter animals are more likely to become sick, or that they're all victims of some sort of past trauma. And certainly for some animals that may well be the case. I know when we adopted Peony, she definitely, she was between 2 and 3. She was found as a stray. We had no idea what had happened to her in the past. And it definitely, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, is that, we took what was a scared, anxious dog who, was terrified of other dogs, was very reactive. And she's not a therapy dog by any stretch today, but she's a very well-behaved, good citizen. And, I think, but I mean, it definitely, and I've had a lot of friends say to me, they're like, the work you did with her was really impressive. And I don't know that I would have been able to do that. And I think, people are challenged at times of like, what do I do? I've got this behavior, maybe for me, I'd never owned a dog before, but, I was fortunate in that, the shelter we adopted from gave us a couple free training sessions. So that helped put me on the right foot. And then as I needed more support, I was able to seek out other trainers. And, obviously I know that isn't available to everyone, but, if the shelter or your veterinarian can help, to provide some tips and tricks, like you said, I think more often than not, people don't want to relinquish a pet. People don't want to surrender a pet, but, especially if you're a first-time adopter, or you don't have a lot of experience training, that really speaks to it. Have you seen, I would think, again, similar to pet insurance companies, if I were a trainer, I would be marketing through my local shelters. Do you see that often, Stephanie? Or
Yes, absolutely. Some of the larger shelters have in-house training programs that they often are working with trainers in the community to contract to provide those programs. If not, there's a whole variety of ways that they do referral programs. And I think it's important to know too that, and you pointed it out, there are a variety of different animals in shelters, and there's just as many a variety of different adopters. And so you often have people who are looking for that project pet. They want to have that satisfaction of taking a pet who's maybe been through a lot and helping them learn to trust, or working on them through training and behavior challenges, or even maybe some medical conditions. And then there's a lot of people who don't want to do that. And both things are okay, because we also have animals for them too. Me personally, I do not do well raising a puppy. I don't have time, and I don't do well with it because it's just not a skill set of mine. I would much rather have a potty trained adult dog that I adopt from the shelter to join my family. And so I think it's important. And one of the things that this report highlights is that there are a lot of different needs, and there's a lot of different perceptions. And all of those things can sometimes be true at the same time. So I think what is often misunderstood, though, is that there aren't puppies and there aren't kittens. There are. There's right now at shelters across the country, there are over 150 different kinds of dog breeds, and mixed breeds and hybrids and mutts are in addition to that. So we have a lot of options within the sheltering system. It sometimes can be difficult to find that pet if you go to the shelter one time, one day. And so there's now a lot of online resources that can help with that. And just as with training, there's a lot of free online trainings sources or subscription paid or other things to get you started. And then you can, go to a trainer in your area or do some home visits. There's a whole host of ways that people can add and integrate their pet into their new home. But we also realize it's not a success only journey. And sometimes it just is not a good fit. And so in those cases, there can sometimes be a lot of shame with people who adopt a pet. And there's all of this celebration and they shared it publicly and they're excited. And then it just doesn't work. And for a variety of reasons. And that's okay. A lot of shelters now are doing trial adoptions or they're doing foster to adopt programs. They're doing all the things that shelter staff used to do when we would bring our own pets into the home. We're like, oh, I'll foster it. And then you end up keeping it. Really what you're doing is you're seeing if it's a good fit for your lifestyle, for the other pet and human family members in your home, all of those things. And if not, bring it back and we'll have another adopter for that pet and we'll have another pet for you. And so I think what this is really highlighting is there are a lot of things that can be worked through with support, like Dr. Shenoy said. When offered the support, it can make a huge difference in having a successful adoption into the long term. And when those things are either unable to be true or don't work, there still is that option to come get another pet and still make a huge difference in the sheltering system.
No, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, I had a friend's mother growing up who, would say in reference to dating, every pot has its lid. And I think it's very, equally applicable to adoptions. You raised a couple points that I'd love to touch on, Stephanie. You mentioned, that there are no puppies available. You'd rather have an adult dog. I was curious, and I might have overlooked it, but what did you see? What do you see in terms of senior dogs? Because I know they're usually the hardest dogs to adopt out of the shelter system. What did the report find with respect to senior dogs?
So we actually dug into that separate from this report a little bit earlier this year. We're going to be updating it this summer on looking at what's happening with dogs by age and by size. And our assumption was, first, let me quick note, there are puppies in shelters. There's a lot of puppies in shelters, and there's more puppies in shelters now than there were pre-pandemic. So if you're looking for a puppy, go to your shelter, they have one. And if not, go online and find a shelter near you that probably has one. Aside from that, when we looked at what was happening, we assumed senior dogs would have a higher length of stay. And so when we looked at it, we looked at, of all the dogs that were adopted, how many days did it take for that adoption to occur from the time they entered the shelter to the time they were adopted? And we expected it to be highest for seniors, middle for adult, lowest for puppy, juvenile. And we didn't really see that to be true as the years have progressed post-COVID. We definitely did see that trend up to COVID and then since it started to actually reverse. And so we are now seeing all ages of dogs. Puppies are still higher a little bit, but we are now seeing all ages of dogs being adopted at actually the same rate. And those slower retired senior pets are often great for a low activity family or even someone who just wants a couch potato. We do still see that interest. And I think the senior pets too, there is a certain population of people who just love senior pets, and they often have just said goodbye to an old one in their family, and they want to help. They already have a lot of the understanding sometimes for the special health conditions, and they just want to take on another and help. And there's also some hospice pets that can be hospice foster or hospice adoptions, that there's a certain segment of people that have a real heart for that too. And so I think the most of our adopters and most of our animals really kind of fall in between. We definitely have puppies, we definitely have seniors, and we have a lot in between. But I think that misconception of I can't find a puppy is really, it can change every day because new animals are entering the system every day. And same with breeds. And there's a lot of regional differences as well. And so that's one of the challenges since the pandemic is our animal transport system really shut down because everybody's been full. And so we haven't been able to move animals around to different organizations to meet demand like we once did. So puppies, where I'm at in the Southeast, you can get them everywhere. And as you start to move more north, not as common, still common though. But we didn't need to transfer, or we not only didn't need to transfer puppies in because now they have existed in other areas where they once were less available, but now they just don't have the space. And so if we can start to improve and increase adoptions, we can start to remove that bottleneck so the animal movement system can occur again. And then that will really increase and diversify the supply that we're able to offer across the country as well.
And I think, one thing you made mention of is online. Obviously, I was really taken. We had Nicole Patrick of Rescue Spot on earlier this year, and I know the report referenced, the application process being a big barrier to adoption. They have come out with a really cool solution that's kind of like a common app or a universal application or a credit bureau for pet adoptions. So shelters can sign up with them. You fill out the application on Rescue Spot one time, and then you can search across all the shelters in their portfolio and on their site and adopt from them. So you can look on a nationwide basis without having to resubmit the same application time and time again. And I think that will be a huge step forward in kind of reducing the complexity there. And I'm really encouraged to hear that, senior pets, are getting a better shake now. I think it kind of leads me back to we are still faced with this problem of needing to, clear the shelters, so to speak. And I know that, that's Hill's big motto. And so, I guess I'd turn it over to you, Dr. Shenoy. When we look at this, what are the steps that the veterinary profession can take? What are steps that, and you've mentioned tons of initiatives that Hills as a company is doing, but, what can other pet industry professionals and organizations do to help? What do you see as, the big action items that, the low hanging fruit, so to speak, for us to help clear the shelters?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I think when we think holistically about some of the challenges that we're putting on the table today and talking about, step one is just continuing this conversation, that we would really love to invite others into the conversation, industry leaders, people from different facets of the pet industry. Stephanie and I were chatting that it's not uniquely a shelter problem. It's not uniquely a veterinary profession problem. Holistically, the pet industry, I think, has kind of an interesting space right now where we can come together, and it takes the work of various facets of that industry having this conversation and digging in together to create some of the solutions. So we have a chance to really see more pets in more households, and the number of pets per household potentially even increase. It's a real opportunity for us as an industry, but of course we want to promote responsible pet ownership and tackle some of these challenges in the right way. So I think number one is coming to the table and participating in the conversation. I would say to other, industry partners that a key thing can be to just reach out to the organizations in the local community and ask questions. What do they need? It may be that you assume they need sponsorship dollars, but there could be in-kind donations, volunteer hours, other, challenges they have, maybe getting the word out about certain initiatives or things, other ways that different industry partners can help. So I think it's really about asking those questions and finding out specifically from your local organizations, what do they need, and kind of working collaboratively. And then message just to anybody is that if you have the ability to bring a pet into your home, there's many shelter pets out there that need loving homes. And so consider either adopting a pet, even fostering a pet, which oftentimes shelters will cover the cost of care for animals that are in a foster situation. Volunteer your time, volunteer supplies. There's just a breadth of different approaches you can take to helping solve some of these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I think from a pet industry perspective, I was talking with folks at Global Pet this spring, and it was like, look, overall pet household ownership is down. Have lost, and millions of pet owning households. And that means there are less households to sell food into. That means there are less pets, that are being taken to the vet. That, not like the industry is struggling. I think, if anything is recession proof, pet care and animal health is. But at the same time, we have this, crisis of overcapacity. And, if we are able as an industry to do more, whether, like you said, that's through sponsorship dollars at shelters or in-kind donations, like I mentioned, providing, shelters with food is a great way for companies to introduce pet owners to their product, and it keeps those animals in the shelter fed and cared for, and it defrays a cost. I mean, I think, Stephanie, you can probably echo this, but I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of these shelters is that they're trying to do the, work of saints with, a shoestring budget. They're relying on volunteer hours. They're relying on employees that are making at or near minimum wage, that are trying to manage applications, that are trying to take care of dogs, make sure that dogs, get the veterinary care they need while they're in the shelters, make sure that they're well fed, make sure that the shelter is clean. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and absent, donation dollars or in-kind donations or donations of volunteer hours, the system really doesn't work. But it really, I mean, if we're not adopting these animals, all of that goes to waste, right? Because we just have pets that are sitting in shelters, not living their best lives. So I think, whether you're an individual or whether you're spearheading of philanthropic efforts at a organization, there is room to help. And I'll throw a teaser out. I'm not going to give too much away, but Petworking is definitely trying to connect some of these dots. So watch in the coming months. Hopefully, we're going to be able to do some exciting things around making, continuing to contribute to the better overall care of animals and better shelter experience for animals. But I think it's like you said, Dr. Shenoy, it's so important for everybody to kind of think about, how can I step up to the plate? How can I come to the table? How can we have these conversations? Because I think, Stephanie, you correct me if anything I said is incorrect, but I don't think any animal wants to be stuck in a shelter for any length of time. They'd much rather be with the family. But it's hard work, and it's definitely a balancing act from a budget perspective to make that happen.
Absolutely. It's hard work. And right now, since the pandemic, more than half of the shelter staff are new to the industry. And so we've had a real brain drain as well at that same time. And as we're approaching aging populations in this country and anticipating more retirements, we're going to continue to see that change. And the volunteer programs that we strongly relied on prior to the pandemic just haven't returned. And so we're now struggling to care for more animals with fewer people. It's one of the great things about the Hills program is that they're feeding shelter pets in over 20% of the shelters across the country. And so that's a huge relief that is taken off of these shelter workers who are trying to figure out how to make the dollar stretch. If you can imagine our cost of care for individual pets and you multiply that by some organizations that care for over 30,000 animals a year, it's incredibly expensive. And especially for municipal governments, their budgets have not kept pace at the same rate of inflation. And so you add that to this broken system because every movement system because every place is full. And it's really coming down to shelter workers having to make really hard decisions every single day. And it's not just a shelter problem, as we talked about. It's a community problem that we need all hands on deck. And if we look at it from, like you said, more pets are more pet customers for industry. We have 6.5 million cats and dogs that are going through the sheltering system every year. And so even if we move that needle a little bit, we would have a huge outcome on additional adoptions and additional customers, and really get shelters to where they're designed, is that it's the last place that an animal goes when there's no other opportunity. And so the more we can do to help support keeping pets in homes that already have them, whether that's with unhoused people or, all the way up, and then also making pet adoption more affordable, more accessible, and pet ownership the same, we can really turn this around, which has now been a 4-year trend of too many animals in the system.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and again, kudos to Hills. I think the statistic I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Shenoy, Stephanie, you mentioned over 20% of the shelters in the U.S. Hills is providing food to. I think that comes out to over 900 was the last number I was aware of.
Up to more than 1,000 nationwide. Yep, pretty significant.
So it's up from what the folks I talked to at Super Zoo about it last year. The Hills State of Shelter Pet Adoption Report, I think that it has been published now, or if it is not, I think it just came out the other day. So you can go online, check that out, kind of read through, help resolve some common misconceptions about adoption, about what it takes to foster a pet, share it with your friends and family. If you have people who are on the fence, this report offers, some potential remedies to some of the barriers that are out there around pet adoption. If people who have wanted to adopt a pet, but might, think that it's too much from a financial perspective, there are programs out there that can help. I think that's the important thing is, we want to promote responsible pet ownership. We don't want to put pets into a situation where they're going to be worse off than when they were in the shelter. But when, they're not getting that one-on-one individualized connection in the shelter. They're one of many, and they don't, not saying they're not bonding with the shelter workers, but I think they're all looking for that forever home. And I think, the amount of literature out there that, speaks to the physical and emotional health benefits for people of having a pet, it should be something that we're trying to promote, across our society. So check that report out. Dr. Shenoy, I don't know if, I know you mentioned, reaching out locally, and certainly the phrase charity begins at home is very applicable to the shelter ecosystem. But, for people that might not have a shelter close to them, or, might just be looking for places they can contribute online, are there any resources that either of you would recommend that people go to make a difference at this point in time?
Yeah, there's over 14,000 animal sheltering organizations in the US. There is one in everybody's neighborhood. They just might have to Google it. But I think that's one of the things the report highlighted too, is a lot of people don't know that these organizations exist. And so that would be a great first step, is to search for the animal sheltering organizations in your community and get involved with one. There's also national animal welfare organizations you can search for as well if you want to support on more of a national level. For Shelter Animals Count, although we're a nonprofit, we still encourage all direct donations to go to the shelters themselves, since we're funded by some of the national organizations, and want to see individual donation dollars and corporate donation dollars go directly to the animals that they serve. So a lot of opportunity. And also there's all these shelters are on social media. So if you're involved in any of those channels, you can often find them that way. But yeah, just go get curious, see what's out there, see how you can help, and we can really start to turn this around, hopefully by the end of the year.
And I guess the remarks I would jump in to add are just would encourage individuals to join me in thanking the shelter professionals for all of the outstanding work that they do, and highlighting the great need that there is for additional individuals to help foster or adopt pets from shelters, because there is such a need right now with those slowing adoption rates. And then lastly, help get the word out about dispelling some of these myths that we can see in the report. Some of the data that we now have at our fingertips, we can use to dispel those myths and really, again, encourage more people to adopt. And if I could just end on a very positive note, we've talked about all these barriers today and painted a little bit of a grim picture. There we go. However, the report shared that 66% of people are likely to adopt shelter pets. So it's not that we have this massive challenge convincing people to go to shelters. I think there is quite a lot of interest in adopting shelter pets, and hopefully we'll see this trend start to turn around in the near future.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. We don't want to. It's an issue that needs solving, but the building blocks are there. And I think work like this, continuing to dispel those myths, making people more aware of the situation as it is, certainly can help. But you're absolutely right. I thought that was a very positive point. It's not that the almost a 2/3 majority of people surveyed are open and interested in adopting shelter pets. So we've just got to get that number up a little higher, move it from 2/3 to nearly all, and then start getting more conversions, and hopefully we can reverse this 4-year trend. But thank you both so much for your time. This was a great conversation. I think it's one that's worthwhile and necessary to have. Dr. Karen Shenoy, Chief Veterinary Officer of Hills, Stephanie Filer, Shelter Animals Count, Executive Director. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us, providing your perspectives, and thank you both for taking the time and identifying the need for this report, and bringing this to light so that more people can be made aware of these myths around adoption, and hopefully we can reverse this trend of declining pet adoption in the U.S.
Great, thanks.
Pet working.
Thanks so much. Great honor to be involved.
Oh, thank you both. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. I'm Peter Kenseth, Pet Working, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care.
Pet Working is presented by Maya Strategy Group, a leading market research and strategy consulting firm, helping clients in the pet care and animal health industries navigate strategic challenges for almost 2 decades.